Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figure It Out cast. This is the 17th episode. This is for October 2017. I'm Adam Koralik, and of course this is a Patreon backer podcast at the onset when it comes out right away at the beginning of the month for Patreon backers of $5 or more per month on my Patreon, which you can find a link to in the description. And of course, if you're hearing this as the public release, this comes out towards the end of the month and you can enjoy it then. That way everybody gets the content, but if you're a Patreon backer, you can basically just get it early, extremely early, as well as having access to other videos early. But enough of that. Let's just get on with the subjects. So basically, just I'm just curious what you guys are doing. Tell me in the comments what's been going on with the last month. How are you guys? For me, it's just been work as per usual, working on this channel, working on my other channels, hopping around to different events and stuff like that, which I'll talk more about in a bit. It's actually, depending upon when you hear this, I went to Japan again, very briefly. I was in Tokyo for a few days. Or I will be going to Tokyo in a few days, again, depending on when you hear this. So I'll have more information on that later, of course. But yeah, it was cool, and I get to go there for business reasons. Like, it's awesome, so expenses are covered, which is fucking great. But yeah, that's really very cool. But anyway, so let's just get on with actual subjects here. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here is a subject picked by Corey Marsh. He's a longtime Patreon backer. He's at the tier in which he gets to pick a subject. And what he wanted to talk about, or have me talk about, I should say, is basically just games I'm looking forward to for the remainder of the holiday season. So stuff that's coming out in October, November, and December. So there's not a whole ton. I mean, like, obviously we're getting into the primo game season, where like a lot of the big extreme stuff comes out. And I'm sure a lot of you are looking forward to various things, and what I'm looking forward to won't necessarily be what you're looking forward to. But hey, we all get opinions, and these are the few that I noticed offhand that I really am rather interested in checking out. Although you never know, like last minute things that could pop up, or releases that surprise you, or games that could be great and you never really thought much about them. It's the nature of gaming, right? But these are the ones as of now that I'm excited about. First is South Park: The Fractured But Whole. Of course, depending on when you hear this game is already out. So I actually got to go to an event for this one. Ubisoft had an event for it in San Francisco. So I actually got to play this game well in advance multiple times. Like this one last time in San Francisco back in, it was September of 2017. And then I had actually played it at E3 back in June of 2017, and then I had played it a full year before that in August of 2016, just a smaller demo. I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't really like Stick of Truth, because even though I'm a huge South Park guy, like I fucking love South Park, man. To the point where, I've got all the episodes on DVD or Blu-ray if they have Blu-rays, and it's kind of cool because they're re-releasing some of the catalog seasons on Blu-ray. Seasons 1 through 5 are going to get Blu-ray releases. I think season 6 is the one they're not really sure if they're going to commit to, because that was the season where they had an episode with Muhammad in it, but that was before that became a big deal. So they may not release that one. Who knows? But that's not the point of this. Point is, I really like South Park. And so when Stick of Truth came around, I really wanted to play it, but the actual game mechanics of Stick of Truth were not interesting to me. I don't really like turn-based RPG combat, stuff like that. That's never been my thing, but I really wanted to play it just because I wanted to enjoy the story. So I ended up watching a lot of Let's Plays of that one, believe it or not. So when it came to The Fractured But Whole, I was kind of expecting a lot of the same. I was kind of like, this really isn't going to be my thing. So when I was recording the footage, I kind of thought, all right, just kind of grit your teeth and get through it, because you're probably not really going to enjoy this. You're going to enjoy the story, and you're going to enjoy watching this episode, but every time you have to actually play it, you're probably not going to have a good time. And much to my surprise, I ended up absolutely loving it. I played it for 3 straight hours before that, that was the end of the session, and they were like, all right, you got to stop now. And I was like, oh, fuck, because I didn't want to stop, because I was actually having a really good time. And I swear to you, that was hugely surprising to me. I thought I was absolutely going to hate that game, like, as far as gameplay goes, but I didn't. So with that being said, that's the first thing I'm really looking forward to is South Park: The Fractured But Whole. Of course, it's out now, depending on when you play or when you listen to this. Next up would be Super Mario Odyssey. This was kind of the same deal. I got to play this at PAX Prime Seattle back in September 2017. I got to play like a 10-minute demo of it at Nintendo's booth. And I remember liking the gameplay, but not really liking the look of it. It didn't look visually impressive. For a game that I assume was originally at some stage of it was in development for the Wii U, and then no doubt transferred, the workload must have been migrated to the Switch. How do I phrase this? Because people are going to say, oh, you just hate the graphics or whatever. Like, no. The thing is, the way I played that game was at Nintendo's booth on their setup using their monitor system of choice, all set up the way they wanted to present that game to you as media and to the public. And I remember just looking at it and noticing like the game had like really poor draw distance, and it just looked really unfinished and unpolished. And it wasn't impressive. It to me, it really felt like something, and this might be extreme to say, especially because I believe the game will be out by the time this podcast is public to most people. So take all of this with a grain of salt. But to me, it really looked like something the Xbox 360 could have handled. And I was a little disappointed by that. Now, obviously, I could eat my words on all of this, and I really hope I get to, because I want to play that game more, and I want to enjoy that game, and I want it to not distract me, if you will. I just remember being very unimpressed by it from a visual standpoint. That said, gameplay was all there. I was enjoying all of that. So I'm not coming out here and saying, oh, it's going to be a bad game, or it is a bad game, or anything like that. That's not the case I'm making. I'm actually very excited. There's a reason I picked it as like the number 2 on my list. But I just, that was the first impression it made was, wow, this is surprisingly visually unappealing. And I wasn't really prepared for that. But I also played, they had 2 demos. The New York style area, and then they had like a more of a Mushroom Kingdom style area. I played the New York style area, and it might have been that. Maybe it was partially just the weirdness of seeing Mario in that environment. I'm not really sure, but I just that was the impression I came away with, was that I just was like, this really wasn't very interesting visually. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. I'm still looking forward to the game. I've had it pre-ordered for a year now, actually. As weird as that is to think about. Or no, not a year. Since I think it was last January when Nintendo made a whole host of Switch game like announcements. That I think that's when I made a pre-order. So yeah, it's been sitting there for a long time. Get 20% off at Best Buy, and then at the time there was some other deal where if you paid with a Visa credit card, you get another 25% off. So I'm basically paying like half price for the game. So I'm certainly not going to be complaining, and I'm looking forward to playing it more. And I'll talk more about the Switch later on in this podcast. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. The next one I'm cautiously optimistic with. In fact, there's 2 games on this list I'm very cautiously optimistic with, but I'll start with this one. Call of Duty World War II. Now, Call of Duty, to me, is a franchise that was way overplayed. And I got why they did it, because it was a moneymaker. But it really started to feel like sports games, where it was the same damn game every year with a fresh coat of paint for one reason or another, or one way or another. And I just didn't really like... I know this is taboo, because most people will disagree with me massively. But once they did the whole Modern Warfare thing, I kind of checked out. I came back to it when they did not Advanced Warfare. What was it? World at War. Call of Duty 5, World at War. Now, I know everyone just rolled their eyes, and they're like, what? How could you say that you like Call of Duty 5 when you like Call of Duty 4? Thing is, I don't play online, so I've never given a shit about the online component. I only care about the single-player campaigns. And to be honest with you, the gameplay of those is always pretty much the same damn thing. So the only thing they've ever had going for me, in addition to the gameplay, the thing that got them over that hurdle, was kind of the investment of the characters, the storyline, all that stuff. And it's not like they were ever really that strong, but at least when they were World War II based, they were based in history, and they were based with some sense of like actual investment, because you're essentially fighting a force for good against a force for evil. And politics aside, history looks back at it that way, as the Allies were the good guys and the Axis were not. But so I kind of got into it on that regard. But all the Modern Warfare stuff, I never caught my interest. I just didn't like their made-up storylines. I thought some of the Black Ops games were at least interesting in concept. You know, like they would try to involve these secret missions that like Kennedy had set out. Because again, I like history. But where they just completely made up stories and stuff, I just didn't like that direction, which is fine. I mean, obviously, I'm in the minority. The game sold like insane and all that stuff. But anyway, the point I'm making here is that Call of Duty World War II is the game I'm kind of like, you know what? If any game's going to get me back into Call of Duty, it's going to be that one. And I've heard, I didn't get to play it early, but I've talked to a lot of my buddies and who do this kind of thing as well, have played it in early access, and they all said it was pretty good. They were surprised. So I'm looking forward to that one, cautiously optimistic about it. But yeah, I definitely want to check that out. The other one that I'm cautiously optimistic about is Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, if you've watched me for a while, you know, of course, the game I was always waiting for was Shenmue 3. But after Shenmue 3, the game I'd been waiting for the better part of a decade was Star Wars Battlefront 3. And then when Disney bought Star Wars and they announced that EA was going to get the game license, that made me scared. And then when EA announced the first thing they wanted to do was do Star Wars Battlefront, I went, no. Like, part of me was excited. Battlefront was coming back, but at the same time, it was EA, so I knew it would suck. And it sucked. It came out and it was exactly what I expected. It was a multiplayer-centric game that really focused heavily on DLC and microtransactions and all that kind of shit, and really didn't have something like that for me. You know, because the thing that I always interested me in Battlefront 1 and 2 was all of the single-player campaign aspects, all those things. There's a reason those games are still popular, is that they can be replayed regardless of an online component or not. They're just always fun. I just don't see how Battlefront 1 by EA could ever be fun without an online component. And so it didn't appeal to me because, as I mentioned with Call of Duty, I'm not an online gamer. I just never was. I never will be. It doesn't interest me. So they've made it very clear this time around that they heard all of our feedback and that Battlefront 2 will have more of a focus on single-player stuff. I'm a little worried about how much they're actually blasting that. They make such a focus about how that's going to be the case that it leads me to believe that, knowing EA, that somehow that isn't actually a good thing. Obviously, I don't know. The game's not out yet. I haven't played it. But I want to try it. But somehow I'm a little worried about the fact that they just keep putting out these flowcharts like, here's how much single-player content is in it. Because, I don't know, man. I just don't trust EA. That's all I'm saying. I just don't trust EA to do anything right. So I will be very impressed if this game comes out and it's actually something I could sit down and really enjoy. But I'm, again, cautiously, I wouldn't say optimistic, but cautiously aware of the possibility of that game being something I want to play. The other cool thing about it, of course, is that my buddy Matt Sloan does the voice of Darth Vader in that game, so that's always fucking cool to see. Sometimes he's so good at that, man. Like, I often forget that's him. Like, I know him. I know his voice very well. I know when I'm hearing his Darth Vader because I've gotten so used to it. But sometimes, like, Lucasfilm does a couple extra tweaks to his voice that it becomes really hard to distinguish it from James Earl Jones. In fact, I know this is sacrilege, but I would argue he's better at doing Darth Vader's voice now than James Earl Jones is. Based on James Earl Jones, for example, did Rogue One, the scenes with Darth Vader in Rogue One. But my buddy does it in, like, Battlefront 2. And I'm telling you, put the scenes next to, back to each other. And I kind of think you might come away with the impression that my buddy does it more like James Earl Jones did it in the 70s and the 80s than James Earl Jones still does. I mean, that makes sense. The guy's like 90 years old, but whatever. I know, sacrilege. But nevertheless, point of all that is I'm paying attention to Battlefront 2. That's as far as we'll go with that. The next one I'm looking forward to is Sonic Forces. I have to, of course, put out there a couple of factors. One, obviously, I grew up loving Sonic titles, so I always pay attention when a new Sonic game comes out. Doesn't mean I necessarily play it, doesn't mean I necessarily ultimately care about it, but it does mean I at least kind of pay attention to it. I never liked when they really took Sonic into these, like, weird directions. Like, I never thought we needed Sonic Shuffle, even for the Dreamcast. Like, we didn't need a Mario Party clone with Sonic characters. I never really cared when they do, like, Sonic and the Black Knight. I don't need, like, RPGs and all that kind of shit. I just wanted your more traditional Sonic games. I'm fine with him doing like 3D versions of stuff. Like Sonic Adventure was great and stuff like that. But for the most part, as you guys are all aware, Sonic didn't really do well in the 3D transition. There's been exceptions. Sonic Generations was good. And of course, the recent Sonic Mania is fucking great. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but Sonic Mania is fucking great. Sonic Forces, I got to play at PAX Prime. I got to play one demo of the first level. And it was pretty good. It has two components to it. It has a straight head-on mode that they've been doing in a lot of the Sonic 3D games. I would compare it kind of like Sonic Lost World. Sonic Forces feels like the sequel to Sonic Lost World, in my opinion. That's really how it played, where it would switch between those two type of mechanics. Ironically, I actually liked the head-on component where he's running and you basically see his back while he's running and you're doing it in that kind of 3D environment. And then they kind of switch to this kind of faux 2D angle where the game is still rendered in 3D. It's not 2D like Sonic Mania, but it looks 3D, but you're doing it from a flat angle, like a traditional Sonic game. I didn't feel like that worked as well. I felt like it was actually kind of screwed with the draw distance, and in the sense that it was hard to judge distance when you're jumping and stuff like that. I mean, that might have just been that first impression. I mean, I could play it again and be like, oh, I don't know what the fuck I was thinking originally. Maybe I was really tired. I don't know. But that's all I've got to go on is the one little demo I played. That said, I'm still looking forward to it, so I'm going to definitely check that one out later. And then the other one that came to mind for the rest of this holiday season anyway that I'm super excited about is Lego Marvel Super Heroes 2. I love those Lego games. Like, I know I'm 30 years old, but those Lego games are really good video games. Like, they've been really good since Lego Star Wars kind of kicked all that off in the modern version of what a Lego game is. There's been very few misses with those games, and I quite enjoyed Lego Marvel Super Heroes. And I don't really see how you can go wrong with that. And I highly recommend those games to like pretty much anybody. Like, those are, they're family friendly if that's important to you, which this podcast traditionally isn't. Almost nothing on my channel usually is. But if you're into that, you got kids or whatever, they'll probably have fun with it. And you as an adult probably are going to have fun with it too, because they're just a fun series of games. There's a lot of great content in there. There's a lot of value for your buck. And on top of that, those games usually get pretty cheap pretty quick too, which is nice. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to Lego Marvel Super Heroes. But yeah, I guess that's my kind of relatively short list of games I'm looking forward to this holiday season. What are some of the games you guys are looking forward to? Let me know in the comments. And thank you very much, Corey, for that subject. Moving on. Next subject, I've talked about this in the previous podcast before, actually, but this is a little different because it's out now. I want to talk a little bit about the SNES Mini. Or the SNES Classic, let's put it that way. The SNES Classic released, and it was quite a big hit. I could not avoid seeing pictures of it on Instagram and on Facebook and YouTube. Like, everybody bought this damn thing except me. I don't care. My position on these like classics or clone consoles, whatever, I don't give a fuck. Like, I just don't. I'm all about legitimate hardware and, items, and I like collectibles and all that stuff. But that NES Mini, that SNES Mini, I never gave a shit. They're just little emulator boxes. And if you like them, I'm not knocking you for it. Like, that's up to you. I mean, it's a brilliant move by Nintendo, because clearly people want those things. There's a market there. They're making money off of it, and good for them. You want to buy it, that's on you. If you like it, if it makes you happy to get it, by all means, go for it. But to me, it's just, there's so many other ways to play those games, and my personal preference is the original hardware. And so I just that doesn't appeal to me. Even as a collectible, it doesn't appeal to me. The only one I would consider getting would be like a Dreamcast Mini or Dreamcast Classic, which of course will not happen because that's Sega, not Nintendo, and Sega doesn't really do that. But yeah, I would never really, no, that doesn't appeal to me at all. I mean, the SNES is my favorite Nintendo console ever produced, and still the SNES Classic does not appeal to me. Although I'm sure people will point out very quickly, oh, but I see all these like Sega flashbacks all the time. Those are very different. Sega does not make those. They simply license their name to it for a quick buck. They're not well-made machines. Don't get confused. The Genesis Classic, which is not a real thing, is not a legitimate competitor to like the SNES Classic. You guys know me. I've always been more of a Sega guy than anything else, but I'll tell you right now, Sega does a shit job on those things because they don't actually make them. So yeah, don't buy them thinking they're as good as the hardware in the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, because they're not. That said, I'm not getting any of them. The other really cool thing about it, though, and I kind of made a small deal out of this, but now I realize it was bigger, was that the SNES Classic, the thing that was really cool about it is that it came with Star Fox 2 on it. Now, Star Fox 2 was in development for a long time and was ultimately axed. It was never released. And in favor, because basically by the time it was done, they were really kicked into the N64 at that point, and they didn't want to put this out knowing full well that Star Fox 64 was around the corner. So they basically just shelved it. And I misspoke about this, and I want to set the record straight. I was wrong. There was a ROM dump of Star Fox 2 that was put out years ago. And that was the one that was floating around forever. People were making reproduction carts out of that. And then, like a year ago, a quote-unquote final beta of the game was dumped onto the internet. And then people started making things out of that. I was wrong in thinking that final beta was actually the final build. It was not. Nintendo did have a more further along and completed, 100% completed build of that game that was never leaked ever. Until now, because the SNES Classic is out and people extracted the ROM from that within a day. Like, it was quick. And you can go out right now and download the final complete build of Star Fox 2 for the SNES. You can get it, and then it works on emulators, it works on EverDrives, and people are already making ROMs of that, or making cartridges out of that. So to be clear what I'm saying, people have now successfully taken the Star Fox 2 that exists on this SNES Classic and have put it onto actual cartridges that work on a Super Nintendo. So you can play Star Fox 2, the final edition, on an actual Super Nintendo. And I think that's actually cool. Like, that's one of the rare cases where I would actually really like to get a reproduction cart of Star Fox 2, the final build. I think that would actually be really, really awesome. Obviously, that's not necessarily legal, but people do it anyway. That is definitely one where I would totally be on board with that. That's something where, so this is just me spitballing here, and I don't think this will happen. But, you know, I Am 8-Bit did a deal with Capcom where they re-released Street Fighter 2 in an extremely limited number for the Super Nintendo like 2 months ago. Like, it was all legitimate except for the fact that Nintendo had nothing to do with it. And it sold out instantly. And then, of course, there were stories about, oh, it might blow up your Super Nintendo, which was an extreme overreaction. It didn't do that. It's just that I Am 8-Bit and Capcom didn't want to be responsible for your Super Nintendo because your Super Nintendo's 30 years old. There is some legitimate possibilities of reproduction boards causing damage because they're not always as well built as the originals were. And I guess in I Am 8-Bit's case, they couldn't guarantee that, which is unfortunate on their part. But the point I'm making with this is it would be really neat, and I know Nintendo will never do this because they never do this with anybody, but if Nintendo could cooperate with someone like I Am 8-Bit or Limited Run Games or somebody like that to make Star Fox 2 physical SNES cartridges, that would be some cool shit. Like, that is something that collectors would go nuts for. Like, I'd be all over that. But I imagine that would be like one of the hardest things to get ever. So yeah, maybe hopefully they don't do that. I don't know. But I'd definitely be down for a reproduction card of that if I could ever get a hold of one. That would just be really cool. But yeah, that other than that, the SNES Mini-Men, our classic, is selling really well. Good for Nintendo. And a lot of people have said that they've had a hard time finding one, but not nearly as hard as like the NES Classic. So they're actually managing, like, most of the people I've encountered who wanted one got one. And good for them. I'm simply not a person who wanted one. But if you didn't get one and you want one, keep an eye out, because I think Nintendo made some comment about how they intend to re-release more of them, and they intend to re-release the NES Classic. So if that's your thing, man, keep an eye out. You'll probably find one. If it's anything like Amiibos eventually, you'll just find those things everywhere. Amiibos are pretty much dead, and I think that's going to be kind of the same way with the classics. But get yourself ready, because you got to believe in like 6 months, or no, a year probably, we will be seeing the N64 Classic. So have fun with that. So let's move on. But speaking of Nintendo, next subject here. So this is kind of going to be old news to a lot of you, but it's something I wanted to talk about just because it's another thing that just perplexes me about them. So Nintendo, if you're not aware, has never been friendly towards the YouTube community, which of course I am one of. And so as a result, a lot of people, you can't play their video games on YouTube. You can't make videos about their games. You'll get flagged. You'll get demonetized. You'll get strikes. Like, it depends on what you're doing exactly, but Nintendo goes after you. They're just like the only company that just doesn't understand how that works. And while I've heard stories the Nintendo of America is okay with it, they can't seem to convince Nintendo of Japan to not do that to people. And Nintendo of Japan has final say. So Nintendo of Japan's official position is you can't do that. So I think they created this thing called the Nintendo YouTube Creator Program, which was basically Nintendo of America's attempt to police it a little, to kind of find a middle ground, to let YouTubers make videos and at the same time keep Nintendo of Japan happy. It's a horrible deal. It's basically an MCN, like a multi-channel network, that would allow you to join Nintendo's network, and you would get a revenue split. And I think it's considered, I think, the worst revenue split of any channel network. Most channel splits are like 90-10, 80-10 if you have a bad deal. Sometimes 95-5, 100-0 is a possibility, although it's never recommended. YouTube offers like a 40, or I'm sorry, Nintendo offers a 40-60. What that means is, if, let's say I have a 90-10, that means any revenue generated by your channel, you keep 90%, your MCN keeps 10%, and Google by default keeps 45%. It's very complicated. Let me say this again. So if there's 100% revenue of your channel generated, 45% of that goes to YouTube. Then the remainder is 55% of your overall. You take that 55%, and then 10%, if you have a 90-10, would go to your MCN, and the other 90% goes to you. So if you sign with Nintendo, of the original 100%, YouTube gets 45. Then you take the remaining 55, 40% of that 55, not 40 out of 55, I mean 40% of 55 goes to you. Well, 60% of that 45 goes to Nintendo. It's easily the worst deal of any MCN. So why would anybody take it? Well, in theory, it gives you access to, or allows you permission to basically make Nintendo-centric content. Now, if you are someone who's very focused on Nintendo content, you might have needed to do that, you know? Or if you're just someone who absolutely loves Nintendo kind of regardless, you might have just agreed to those conditions. And that's all fine and good if that's really what you want to do. It's a horrible deal, and it's not recommended to anybody, but some people did it. Now, Nintendo, the point of this story, though, is that what Nintendo did is they've now banned live streaming of Nintendo content on that program. And what that essentially means is there are people who are allowed to make Nintendo content and not get punished, even if they're not part of the network. So one such example is my other channel, Game Society. We are not signed with Nintendo. We would never do that. But we have made videos on Nintendo's content before, and they've never cared. They've never come after us, which we don't understand, because they should. Logically so, we violate most of their rules by, swearing while playing games. We don't make fun of them. We don't call their games shitty or anything like that. We just swear and we do things we know Nintendo would never like. But we're allowed to live stream their content without consequences. We just don't have permission to do it. It's a gray area. However, if we had signed with Nintendo to be like, you know what, we want to work with you, we want permission to do your content and all that stuff, we would now be completely banned from streaming their stuff. But outside of their network, it's okay to stream their stuff. This is like one of the dumbest things I've ever heard of an MCN doing. And it's no doubt a result of the fact that they just don't like the idea that you can't really control a live stream, and they don't know what you might say on there. And they probably believe if you're live streaming this game, anything can happen. You can say anything and it'll be out there forever. And they don't want to be tied to anything possibly negative. What they're not getting is that it's way more negative to create that much bad press for yourself. But at the same time, this same company just sold, this arcade classic SNES thing, like, the SNES Classic, and is making bank on it. They're kicking ass with the Switch. It's like, who am I to tell them what they can and can't do? Like, it's their business model. It just seems stupid to me, but that is the situation. So now you can't stream Nintendo stuff if you're actually signed with Nintendo, which doesn't make sense. So that's that. Moving on to the next subject. Another bit of Nintendo news. I just decided to group all the Nintendo stuff on like one half of this podcast because there was a lot of it. this is all right. So you guys know me. I am not a fan of digital games or digital content typically associated with games. I've always felt like games are games, but at the same time, there is the sense of ownership that goes along with buying a game. You know, I like having it. I like possessing it. To me, it's artwork in addition to being a game. It's proof of history. Like there's a lot to a game beyond just the the bytes of data that are on either a disc or a cartridge, right? Or on a hard drive if it's digital. To me, it's more than that. And this is one of the reasons I don't like digital content. So the Wii Shop channel, which was Nintendo's basically way to buy digital games on the original Wii and on the Wii U, provided you went through the Wii mode, that service will be shutting down on January 30th, 2019. 2019, not 2018. 2019. You have over a year of that service still. And after that, the channel will no longer function. You will no longer be able to download content on there. And I believe what that means is as long as your Wii or Wii U with games on it is operational, you're fine. But you can no longer re-download games in the event that you accidentally delete them or your Wii breaks and you like re-log in or whatever. You can't get them back because they're not property. You don't buy digital games. You essentially rent them almost indefinitely. But eventually there are circumstances in which they can be taken away from you. And if they can be taken away from you, they're not property unless you argue that the taking away part is theft. So one could make the legal argument that if digital content is property, what Nintendo's doing by shutting down the channel is technically theft. Since no one's making that legal case, it can't be property. And that's always been my case as well when it comes to buying games. Now, when it comes to the Wii Shop channel, there is another catch to this that isn't being as talked about, which is Wii points. Basically that was like, digital currency you would buy, in gift card form, or you could buy them online, whatever, and you'd redeem them. Very much like, there was Xbox Live points for a while before they just used straight up credit cards and everything. Those points, you will no longer be able to add them into your account after March 26th, 2018. So you have a couple months left if you have any of these old cards laying around to plug them into your Wii or Wii U and download stuff. That's up to you, obviously. But yeah, and after that, 200 games will go down and never come back. So be aware, if you have the Wii Shop channel and you care about it, get your ducks in order, get them all in a row and make sure you back up your content as best you can, I guess. Or if you have any of those Wii points cards, make sure you redeem them because they will be toilet paper after March 26, 2018. So yeah, one of many reasons I'm not a fan of digital content, because I get the argument that a lot of people like the convenience of it and stuff, but it was never for me. And I recognize I don't represent everybody. My tastes, my persona is not the way everybody's going to carry themselves. I simply want to acknowledge the problems I have with it, and where you stand is up to you. But that's my position on that. So next subject here. So as per usual, if you guys follow me, I fly a lot. I go to a lot of events and conventions. I kind of just fuse them there. I have to go to a lot of different stuff for many different reasons. I get shipped off to things. So for a long time, people kept saying, hey, why don't you bring your Switch with you? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And I never really did it because I never knew. Like when I would go somewhere where I thought I'd be coming back with things, I was like, the Switch is a bad idea to bring with because it takes up real estate in my bag, right? And I didn't want to waste it on that. But as these conventions and events, continue, I realize I'm bringing less and less stuff back. And I'm bringing less and less stuff there to begin with because I realize I'm so good at this now. Like I know exactly what my essentials are going to be on any sort of trip. So I've actually decided, I'm going to start bringing the Switch to things. And I'm going to start playing it on a plane because there's not really much else to do. Like a lot of times I would do some work on there, but it does eventually get to a point where I don't even really have that as an option right now. So I started playing the Switch more. And I got to tell you, for the first time in my life, I'm like really getting into a handheld platform, which I was not expecting to do. Now, obviously, the Switch is great because, not only do you have the handheld aspect of it, I can continue the game at home on a television, which is, of course, the goal. And that's very, very appealing to me. The games I've been focusing on a lot lately is more of the stuff you can just kind of pick up and play in short bursts. Because to be honest with you, playing the Switch more, I don't really enjoy playing it as a handheld. I enjoy the game content, but I still don't enjoy the fact that it is actually a handheld. That has never really sat well with me. What I mean by that is just it actually starts to hurt to play after a little bit, like almost like I got arthritis or some shit. It's not a very comfortable thing to play for very long. I'm considering bringing like the Pro controller with me and like kind of setting it up. Problem is that it can't do that while in airplane mode, which kind of defeats the whole point. So I can't really do that. You have to kind of treat it like a more traditional handheld. So I have to play it in short bursts as a result. So what I've been playing a lot of is Mario Kart 8, which I already knew was a legit game because I played the crap out of that on the Wii U. But the other one I've been playing a lot, and this is going to shock the world, Sonic Mania. Now, I know you guys, wait. Sonic Mania is digital only. What the fuck are you talking about? You don't do that. I know you. Hypocrite, exposed, hashtag bullshit. So here's the thing. I didn't actually buy Sonic Mania. A guy on Twitter actually contacted me. I believe his name was D-Dog. He contacted me and he was just like, "Hey, dude, you know, I bought two copies of Sonic Mania. I actually don't need the other one. If you want, I'll just give you the code for it." And I was like, "If you're sure, man." So he just gave me the code, and I thought, all right, what the hell? I'll download it. It's kind of like I have Xbox Live Gold, and it comes with those free games every month. I don't usually play them, but I still download them. Because if I want to try a game before I buy it, I can do that. So it's kind of the same logic with Sonic Mania. Was like, I assume at some point that game will get a physical edition. Knowing Sega and their love for re-releasing content, I would be surprised if it didn't get a physical copy in some form at some point. That said, as it obviously doesn't have one right now. So I thought, okay, I'll just do that. I'll play it on the plane. And of course that game is fantastic, and I would love a physical edition of it. It's fucking ripe for it. I don't know why they didn't do it. But yeah, it is a really good game. It is a really good game. And I would really, really like to be able to own that and have it in my collection, because I obviously, as mentioned before with all that Wii Shop channel stuff, I just don't like being at the mercy of a license, you know? I think that's shitty, because that's not property. But again, we already kind of talked about that. So basically the point I want you to take away from all this is that the Switch is definitely growing on me. It's something I like. I never disliked it, but it's catching me in a good place. Like, I'm more excited about it than I think I originally was going to be, and that's good. So I'm gonna start picking up, I think, more Switch content. Granted, there isn't a whole lot right now, but that's definitely getting better because sales of it are getting better. And I people have been asking me, like, you know, are you going to do some sort of update Switch video and talk more about how it's been? I'm like, yes, I'll do that, but I'll do that when it's, you know, like the Switch's birthday, like in March. Like, there's no reason to really do that right now. But currently, my initial prediction that the Switch wasn't going to do that well was wrong. I will admit that right here and right now. It's doing well. However, I maintain that I'm not sure it will ultimately do well, which was kind of my original point, although not articulated too well. The Switch, I think, has been riding the wave of a couple of hits. It initially burst through that door because it had Legend of Zelda going for it. And then they just threw out, the next big hit was Mario Kart 8, which they basically just threw out the single most successful game on the Wii U and put it onto the Switch. And that was enough to move units, which was good because you needed to do that. And it started getting some third-party developers to at least test the waters. And by doing so, they managed to sell some copies of games that are well associated with something like the Switch. Like Street Fighter II, for example, was a great idea on Capcom's part because it's a game that's been done forever. It's also something that people classically associate with Nintendo. And it didn't really cost them much to do that. So they probably made a lot of money on that. And I know it sold relatively well because Capcom's diving more into it. And so now that there's a lot of Switches actually out there, there are more developers that are willing to give it a shot, and that's good news. I mean, we all know about that now, and that's great. You know, like Doom's coming out, Bethesda's going to give it a shot with more titles. So I'm excited for it, and I know that the obviously Mario Odyssey, which I mentioned before, will probably be pretty successful on it. But a lot of what's coming after that seems to be a lot of third-party content, which is great, but it's a lot of older third-party content, and it's a lot of the Wii U's greatest hits. And I'm worried about that in the long run. I know people bring up, oh, Metroid Prime 4. Metroid Prime 4, at least at this point in time, doesn't even have a real developer behind it. It just has the fact that it exists. Nintendo put that out there as like a shareholder thing, just to appease people. There isn't a whole lot known about that game, if, you know, it even comes into existence, which it probably will. But yeah, I guess I'm saying the Switch is successful right now, but don't be surprised if that changes quickly within the next 6 months to a year. I hope it doesn't. I want it to be successful. I love the idea that a lot of physical indies are coming to this thing too. So that was one of my things where I thought that it could be great for that down the road. So we'll see. But it's been interesting to see how it's been shaping up. So that said, I like the Switch, and hopefully it stays successful. Hopefully I'm dead wrong and it ends up just being just huge. So now we're going to take a little bit of a break here and do some shout outs. The following people are all Patreon backers, and they're at the level in which they get a shout out every month. I kind of talk about you for a little bit. And basically, this is just a thank you for continuing to back the Patreon. I really appreciate that. You can upgrade your pledge or add a pledge at any time of your choosing to get into this as well, and help me basically fight off Adpocalypse, because I'm not going to lie, that's been coming after all of us on YouTube with like a sledgehammer. It's been really, really bad. And you have to understand now, guys, that when I upload a video, YouTube's new system automatically demonetizes the video. Automatically. They don't allow it to be monetized, and then until it reaches a certain view goal. And once it does that, they will review it if you submit it for review. And if they decide it's acceptable, which they almost always do, because my content is not offensive beyond cursing, it doesn't consist of, you know, terrorism or whatever, then eventually it gets remonetized, but it gets remonetized at a substantially lower rate than it used to because of the lack of revenue that now exists on YouTube. Cry me a river, I know. But basically, the point I'm making is that YouTube revenue is not good. And so I really appreciate the Patreon support. And so to the following people, thank you very much for what you've done. Justin Webb, who is OG. I know he's been around for a long time. I've met him twice now. He lives in Arkansas, but both times when I went to the Missouri Game Con, he drove up from Arkansas to St. Louis to meet me, to hang out. We've got a bunch of photos together. Really nice guy. He also bought me a copy of Frogger for the Genesis like a year ago. It was great. You know, I'd mentioned that to him like casually, I think, when we were at the first Missouri Game Con. I said I was looking for it because it was the last officially licensed Sega Genesis game. And then he just buys me a copy and sends it to me. So thank you again, Justin. That was really awesome of you. Rob Janos, who I actually just met at AVGC 2017. We hung out for a bit. He came to my panels. He asked me a few questions on the panels, which was really nice of him to do. He's a really cool dude. And so thank you again, Rob, for coming out to that. Trey Wagner, who is actually a good friend of mine now. We hang out. He actually lives in Chicago. And we see each other like, once every couple weeks and get together and go have burgers and all this stuff. And that's, he's a really good dude. So thank you for, not only just, he started off as just a fan and as a backer and everything. And then we're actually friends. Like we hang out all the time now. So thank you, Trey, for doing that. And then, now Tim Inman, I'm sorry, dude, I've never met you as far as I know. If we have, you didn't mention it. And he's the newest backer. He just signed up last month. But so thank you, Tim, for joining this. I appreciate that. And hopefully, I get to meet you at something. Cause I like meeting people. If you guys, followed me, especially during the summer at conventions and stuff, like if you ever follow my Twitter, like I'll, if you see me there, like I'll take a photo with you. No problem. We'll chat for a little bit. You post it all over social media. Go for it, man. I'm always for meeting people who watch the channel. I always appreciate that because that's like really, really cool that people actually still do that or ever did that in the first place. So thank you very much. So seriously, guys, thank you, Justin, Rob, Trey, and Tim. You guys are the best. Moving on to yet another Patreon backer here, who has a subject in mind. Kyle Vaughn, who is OG. He's been around for pretty much the beginning of this podcast. He's been backing it. And he decided, usually he doesn't really care what subject we pick. He just says, hey, go ahead, do whatever you want. But this time he actually had one specific idea, and I thought it was a pretty interesting one because he was right. He wanted to talk about the fact that video game soundtracks are getting a bit of a vinyl, like a record player revival. And he just kind of thought like, that's interesting, and like, what is that? And so I'm not, you guys know me, I'm not really a music guy. It's never been my thing. I'm not super knowledgeable about music, but I noticed exactly what he's talking about. There is a revival in vinyl records and in video game soundtracks too. And I know because I participate in it. Like, I follow Data Discs. Data Discs is a company based out of the UK who's been doing primarily like Sega content. I started checking into them because they were doing Shenmue on vinyl. And I was like, oh shit, I want that, you know, purely as a collectible. I never really thought beyond that. And I got it, but I also picked up a bunch of their other ones, and I just kind of kept getting them at first just because it was cool. And then I actually ended up getting a record player from a fan actually named Spock Avriel sent me one. Like a nice decked out record player. It was like built in like 92, which everything I've heard about record players, don't get the modern USB ones. Those are shitty. You have to get one from like the 70s, 80s, 90s. Ones with a heavier bass because they sound better. So he sent me one from, I think it was built in 92, and he had completely restored it and all that stuff, sent it my way. And I listened to it, and I always thought, because again, I'm not a music guy, I always thought that this is just a big hassle for something that's really kind of pointless and old. I never really got it until I actually had it all set up, and I was like, holy shit, I can tell the difference. To the naked ear, to a noob, I can tell the difference. This actually does sound better. And I was surprised by that. So when I started listening to video game soundtracks I knew extremely well, especially Shenmue, I was like, wow, this actually really does make a difference. And I think because there are more USB vinyl record players that are popping up now. I mean, it's chicken and the egg logic, like which exactly came first. Somebody took that bet. Somebody pushed one and it resulted in the other, and I don't know which was which. Somebody either started pushing records and then the record players followed, or someone started pushing record players and the records followed. I don't know, but either way, in general, vinyl records are up as far as popularity, and video game soundtracks have just kind of fallen into that with more and more people doing it. And I gotta be honest, it is something I never thought I would recommend, but I do recommend it. If you can find an old record player and start getting some of your favorite game soundtracks on vinyl, you should totally do that, because they really do sound great. So like I said, I've been following Data Discs for a long time. I've gotten every single one of theirs to date. In that one, that boils down to your favorite scores, you know, like not the quality of the records are always solid, because Data Discs has been very good at getting original masters. As far as I know, they've only done Sega content. I don't recall them ever splitting beyond that. Like, they didn't do anything with Nintendo yet. The only other ones I have are, there's like a Dreamcast collection and a Sega Mega Drive, aka Genesis collection, that both came out in just Australia. I have those. And then the only other guys I can think of that I've supported is I Am 8-Bit. I am, like, as I mentioned them before with that Street Fighter 2 cartridge. But I Am 8-Bit has done some video game ones. The only one I picked up was Runbow. Now, Runbow, I mentioned this in the last episode of Playload. Runbow is a game I have never played. Runbow is a game for the Wii U. I think it exists on other platforms as well, but I know it exists on the Wii U because that's what I got it for. And it came with a digital download of the score. And I downloaded it just kind of for the hell of it, and I just listened to it, not thinking much of it, and I absolutely loved the music. Again, I've never played a single second of that game. It has no context for me. I just loved the music. And so when I Am 8-Bit announced they were doing a record for that game, I bounced on it. I was like, give me that shit. I need it right away. It has to exist. I must own that. And I've listened to the record of it multiple times, and it's fucking great. So I think that it's a combination of nostalgia that's making all this work, as well as just the fact that it is actually just really cool. Like, they actually do sound really good. And there's a lot of really good video game music out there that people for the longest time really didn't, at least in the mainstream, if you will, experience outside of the game itself. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that a Metal Gear Solid soundtrack on vinyl will be mainstream and that everyone's going to have that shit, because that's not true. But there is enough of a market now where it's not the most of underground concepts to listen to the score of a video game, and to listen to it on vinyl just kind of elevates the actual sound quality, and it just makes it more appealing. I think that's what it is, but I'm no expert on the subject, so I can't really say. I can only really speak to my experience, which is I'm getting the ones that I think are cool and I would love to hear, because knowing now that they actually do sound better is impressive. The only other one that I remember, like the other one that I bought, isn't video game related, but I bought it because I maybe for this exact reason, was I Am 8-Bit did a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers vinyl record, which consisted of like 10 different songs from the TV show. And I needed that because I loved that music, as cheesy as it is. I loved it. I grew up on that shit, and having it on a record, it definitely sounded even better. And I was just like, this is so fucking awesome. Is it good music? No. I'm sure all of you would argue that's actually terrible music, because it is. But it's a good combination of my personal enjoyment of that music with the nostalgia that it brings me, while at the same time actually sounding better. And I think just the fact that it even got made was definitely cool. So I think that's a large part of it. So I would love to see more video game soundtracks out there on vinyl. But it's also something, a trap. I don't know if I necessarily want to fall into having to collect vinyl record soundtracks. As it is, I already spend too much money on like, you know, the IM 8-bit ones. I might have to get more selective, because some of the ones I got I kind of regret, because not because they were not well made, but because like I didn't have any nostalgia for those particular games, and so I listened to them like once and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm good, because like it just didn't mean enough to me. And that's where you got to be a little bit more careful, I think. But yeah, I guess that's enough for that. So thank you, Kyle, for that subject. And moving on here. So another game that is purely digital, that I'm sure a lot of you have played already, and I would love to, and I kind of already did, is Cuphead. Cuphead is a game that I think premiered at E3 in like, what the hell was it, like 2014? Like, it was a long time ago. I got to play it at Gamescom 2015. Or maybe they first mentioned it at Gamescom 2015. I don't know, I'm sorry, E3 2015. But yeah, I mean, I think it was E3 2015 is when they first announced it. But I got to play an early access build of it at Gamescom in Germany 2015, and I remember thinking, this game is fucking great, and it's really hard. And I remember talking to Chris Charla about it. Now, Chris Charla is like the number 2 at Xbox. And I remember talking to him. It's funny to mention this now, actually. He had mentioned how they probably were not going to have a physical edition of it, and I'm kind of amazed that they knew that 2 years ago. But he had mentioned very specifically that he really liked the idea of putting all the music onto a vinyl record, appropriately enough, given the last subject. And then fast forward to when the game actually came out, and that's exactly how it played out. They didn't do a physical edition, but they did do a vinyl record of it, which is crazy. Now, I don't have it in any form. As mentioned above, I'm definitely not pro digital content. That said, I really want to play Cuphead, but I'm not willing to financially support it at this time. If they gave it a physical edition, I'd buy it in a heartbeat. It's, you know, it's really the only game Microsoft has to push throughout the holidays, other than like Forza 7. So they're gonna do that because it's like the only game everybody was really excited about that they were making. Now, the cool thing about that game, if you don't know its background, man, like it's based on all these like 1930s cartoon styles. And it was actually just kind of discovered by Chris Charla, but I don't think he's getting enough credit for it. It was an indie game that was basically being made by these 2 Canadian guys who were just kind of hand drawing the entire game. And he kind of found it and decided he really wanted to push it. He thought it was a great idea. And so that's what made it take so long, was that they had to basically hand draw every possibility in that game, which was insane. Just these 2 guys, because I don't think they wanted to extend their development team beyond that. That's also why it took so long. So that said, it's a game I really, really want to play, but I doubt I'll ever get to, unless it's like free with Xbox Gold at some point, maybe. But yeah, or if they give it a physical edition. I think at some point that game will get some sort of physical edition, maybe one with like, I don't know, because Microsoft has some history of doing that, so we will see. But at the moment, I'm the oddball out, much like I was with the SNES Classic. I'm the oddball out who actually doesn't care about it. But I mean, I care in this case. I just can't play it. Moving on. Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm sure a lot of people have already talked about this, obviously. Coming, a lot of people are excited about it. It's not one that I ever really... It never drew me in, but that's not the point of this particular subject. The point of this subject is it may not be coming to PC. And that's interesting. Now, I'm not a PC gamer, so this doesn't affect me directly, but I still empathize with PC gamers who would obviously love to play this game. Red Dead Redemption, very infamously, never came to PC. In fact, the ideal way to play it is actually the Xbox 360 version running on an Xbox One. That's still, to this day, I guess, the best way to do it. And it's because of that Red Dead Redemption 2 is still like the only Xbox 360 game that really kind of sells at all. Like you can easily find sealed copies of it still at like Best Buy or whatever. It's one of the games they re-released with like an Xbox One case, kind of like the Fallout games. They did that too. So that's interesting. Now, Rockstar doesn't have a great history in modern history of releasing games on PC. Like very notoriously, they didn't do it with Grand Theft Auto 5 until like 5 months after the initial release. And my guess is because they were kind of basically asked the same question with Red Dead Redemption 2, and they were kind of gave that non-committal where it basically sounded like they didn't have plans, but they're considering it, blah, blah, blah. If I had to guess, I'd say Red Dead Redemption 2 does come to PC, but probably not until like 5-6 months later. I think they're trying to replicate the success of Grand Theft Auto 5, and they're not 100% sure what actually made Grand Theft Auto 5 the juggernaut of success that it was. Like, I'm sure they knew it would do well, but I don't think they knew it would do like Avatar well. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't know it was going to blow up to that extent. So I think there's somebody telling them, like, just try it the exact same way, you know, give it the base console release, 6 months later do the PC release, 6 months after that do the upgraded console release. I'm just making that up, but I think that'll happen. So don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if that happens. Again, we will see. Now, does this game have any shot of coming to, say, like the Switch? Probably not. But if you want to see Rockstar content on the Switch, go out and buy LA Noire for the Switch, and then maybe you'll get Grand Theft Auto 5 on there. Going back to Switch talk, of course. But that's kind of, I guess, all I have to say about Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, talking about another sequel that I have a little more interest in, Shenmue 3 publicly addressed the whole facial expression issue. Now, I mentioned this in my last podcast. Infamously at Gamescom, EaseNet released a trailer for Shenmue 3. And the big walk away from that for a lot of people was that the fact that the character models, their faces were very stiff. And I basically expressed in that podcast that I was like, look, there's no way that that's how it's actually going to look. It's just that this is as far as they got along by the time they needed to cut a trailer together. They're clearly still working on it. In fact, Yu Suzuki said exactly that at Gamescom when asked about it. But they underestimated the internet, which is unfortunately kind of a Japanese thing to do, which is to kind of underestimate the public reaction of the internet, of what it's capable of, which is why you get Nintendo's weird YouTube policies and stuff like that. So in this case, they were kind of forced to address it more publicly. So they actually released a video showing exactly like, hey, look, we're upgrading facial animations. Seriously, we're working on it. Seriously. And I mean, it didn't wow me, but at the same time, I'm not really expecting to be wowed by it. People love to complain. They really do. I've seen a lot of people like looking at the upgraded facial models. They were showing like this old lady and like how her facial models can be expressed and changed and all that stuff. And people are like, oh my God, it doesn't look all that good. I'm not impressed. This is awful, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking like the game has like another year of development, dude. Like judge it when it's done. You know, that's like judging a cake when you just have like the components on the table. Like you haven't made it yet. Just chill the fuck out. The game is not done yet. Once it's done, you're free to judge it all you want, but just let them bake the damn cake first. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, they have addressed the facial issues. They're working on it. So moving on, next subject here. This may or may not be relevant by the time this podcast goes up, but Senile Team, which is a developer who made Rush Rally Racing, which is a really awesome indie Dreamcast game. If you guys have never played it, you should definitely look into it. They just re-released it as Rush Rally Reloaded with extra content and stuff. Definitely worth checking out. It actually was released on the Wii digitally on the Wii Shop channel, so go get it while you can. But I'd recommend the Dreamcast version, the re-reloaded version. Anyway, so the Senile Team is working on a new Dreamcast game, and as well as a PS4 version. It's called Intrepid Izzy. They're doing it through Kickstarter. So if you want, you can look up Intrepid Izzy on Kickstarter and you can go and support the game, and we can get, another game for the Dreamcast from a very reputable developer who's done, like I said, a very quality title before, and they've done a few other games over the years. I believe they also made Beats of Rage, but I don't think they were ever allowed to release that because it contained too many licensed characters and stuff. But this is all their own creation. So Intrepid Izzy could be another physical edition Dreamcast game that we get, which would, hey, Dreamcast is my favorite console of all time. I'll support anything on there. So yeah, that would be great. So if you get a chance, you got a little extra money, go over and check out Intrepid Izzy on Kickstarter. Another story here very quickly. We're kind of doing the lightning round stuff here, but the Atari box is a big pile of shit. Yeah, I'm really surprised by that. Okay, so I am so sick of people messaging me and being like, hey man, you were wrong. Atari is coming back. They're making a console. Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just wrong. So here's the thing, man. I've mentioned a few times that Atari is essentially a dead company. It's never going to come back and make a new console. And then so people, kind of like, hey, look, Atari box, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. So the Atari box, you have to understand, Atari is not Atari anymore. Atari is a name that was purchased by someone else, and they simply own that name, and they can do whatever the hell they want with it. The actual original Atari company that was based in California doesn't exist anymore. This new iteration is simply making basically, I guess in this case, I predicted it would be like a little Android box that played Atari 2600 games. Turns out it's Linux based and it plays Atari 2600 games. Woohoo! And it's going through Kickstarter. Yeah. All right. I mean, that's fine for something like Intrepid Izzy. It's an indie game with a goal of like $45,000 or something. The Atari box, for it to be a legitimate competitor to Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, it would have to have like $1 billion plus in R&D alone, to be a real thing. You can't make a console through Kickstarter. You just can't. That's how you get the things like the Ouya. How many of those damn things do you need to produce to show before people just recognize this is pointless? Nobody wants these little clone boxes. They're useless. The only reason that this one stands out at all is because the Atari name is on it. And that's entirely what they're banking on. If this exact same platform came out, it would just be the NVIDIA Shield. It'd just be a thing that everybody's like, oh yeah, that was a thing, wasn't it? I don't even remember. That really didn't work out too well. How many of these crap clone consoles do you need before you realize this doesn't matter? The only company that's capable of making a clone console that gets people's interest is Nintendo, because they're fucking Nintendo. People like the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, as mentioned before. And I think that's partially who the people who own Atari's name thought was we'll make one of those, but we'll make it with Atari because Atari's just as well loved, and we'll just do this cheap, and we'll do it through Kickstarter. We won't even have to pay for our own investment, blah, blah, blah. We make a shit ton of money. I guarantee that's as much thought as went into it. And to be arrogant enough to assume that is a legitimate competitor to anything is just insane. So no, Atari is not making a new console, and you should not support this. It's going to be a giant fucking pile of crap if it ever comes into fruition. So there you go. That's my thoughts on the Atari box. And no, I'm definitely not getting one. So a couple other things I just wanted to talk about quickly here. I kind of had a strange nostalgia moment, the other day. I was just kind of sitting around working on something, and I was reading some news on a gaming website, and I kind of thought man, I kind of miss doing this the way I used to do it. And what I mean by that is when I was a kid, and this is partially, I'm sure, fueled by nostalgia, but when I was a kid, this was pre-internet, I would be, at school, playground, a new issue of a video game magazine would come out, like EGM or, Tips and Tricks, all these things that I'm sure some of you remember, and a lot of you I'm sure have never even heard of. But there was a lot of gaming magazines back in the day. And I remember how much fun it would be when somebody would get one of those issues and they'd bring it to school, and we'd all read about it at recess, and we'd hear about these things that were coming up. We'd all be talking ooh, there's a Resident Evil 2 coming? That's crazy. And you'd see a couple of screenshots of it and stuff. And I guess the point I'm making here is I really miss gaming magazines. Now, I know to some extent some gaming magazines still exist, so it is largely nostalgia that's fueling this. But I was just, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to share that with you. I was just feeling nostalgic about the fact that that's not really possible anymore. And I pretty much guarantee that kids don't do that anymore, because every one of them has smartphones and stuff. And I'm sure they all get excited and talk about different things for different ways. But I kind of miss the warmth, if you will, of not knowing more than a little bit of a teaser. Because back then, you know, you would just sit there and you'd read the magazine, you'd have only what the author wrote and a couple of pictures if you were lucky, and you just had to use your imagination of what this was going to be. And that in of itself was like its own adventure. It was exciting. But the fact that now you can pretty much look up anything, and the whole concept of early access and, you know, alphas and betas and all this shit, like you get way too much information. It kind of sucks a lot of the fun out of it. Especially as an adult who has to pay attention to all this stuff. I don't know, but maybe your experience is different. Like, you know, tell me if you're younger, or if you know, you're obviously, if you're younger than me, but if you were in school even just a few years ago, is it all still like that? Is that ever there? Or is that, you know, what's that experience like now, I guess is what I'm asking. And all I'm saying is I just kind of miss that. That was just it. There's no real point to that other than just I kind of miss gaming magazines, man. That shit was kind of fun. That was one of those things in the 90s that's gone now, basically. So just a couple other subjects here, and then I guess we'll move out. I recently saw the movie It, you know, the remake. And I thought that movie was great. I remember I had never seen the original, like the Tim Curry one. I just never got around to it. And after I saw the new one, which I expected to be scary, it was not scary at all. It was like a very entertaining comedy. And I don't mean that like it was bad, like I was laughing at it. I was laughing with it. Like it's got a lot of jokes in it. It certainly was not a scary film. And also, I'm 30 years old, but that's probably part of it. But I really enjoyed that movie. And it's kind of amazing to me that I never knew anything about the It storyline. Not a damn thing. Like I knew it had a clown in it, and I've seen the memes of like, you know, Tim Curry as Pennywise the clown in the sewer, basically telling people like, "Hey, come down here, kids. We have candy." And then they show the kid going down there instead of trying to run away or whatever. Like that was the extent of what I knew about It. So after I saw it, I thought it was great, and I was like, "Oh shit! All right, cool. I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel and all that stuff." And I should really watch the original. Which turns out the original, as I'm sure a lot of you know, was a TV miniseries. It wasn't actually a movie. But I sat down and watched it. It's like 3.5 hours. And I was really surprised by who's in it. You know, I was like, oh, wow, John Ritter was in this? Wow, Annette O'Toole was in this? Seth Green was in this? This is really weird. And I knew Tim Curry was in it. But I gotta say, like, that is definitely, if you want, let's just call it a movie, even though technically it isn't. That is a movie that really did not age well. And I say that as someone who never saw it originally, which I'm sure is the point of it. People love that movie because I think a lot of them saw it when they were younger, and that was intimidating to them as a child. Watching it as an adult for the first time, not only was I not intimidated or not scared, I actually found it incredibly cheesy and just hokey, and it just in a lot of ways didn't work. The only part of that really holds up is just Tim Curry's performance, and his performance is very limited because he's not in it that much. The few scenes he has where he's actually allowed to do anything, he's really good in. But aside from that, there's not much keeping that there. And, you know, at the end, maybe I won't talk about spoilers, but even though it's a 27-year-old movie, still, I was kind of surprised as my reaction to watching that for the first time, because I expected to at least be like startled at some point, but really I was borderline bored with it other than when Tim Curry was on screen. Yeah, so it was kind of strange. It's kind of strange. That said, still recommend checking it out, but I would, this is one of the rare instances where I would actually say watch the remake. I thought it was better. And I'm sure that's sacrilege to a lot of people, but I really think maybe try it. Try perhaps erring towards the side of the remake. I thought the remake was carried itself more interestingly. Now, of course, I am like many of you, I've never read the book. And I say that pretty boldly, but at the same time, I'm sure I'm right. I don't think too many people have read the book. And from what I understand of the book is borderline unfilmable. Like there's so much insanity in it that you'd have to make very serious creative changes to make it work, which is why the original version of the movie is extremely different from the new version, because it's two totally different interpretations of that story. So that's, yeah, that said, I'm looking forward to the It sequel. I the thing that I posted a Facebook status about this, and I was joking at the time, but now I'm starting to think maybe I was kind of right, was I said the scariest thing about It was that now we're going to see a Cujo remake and a Misery remake and a Pet Sematary remake, and this will all be part of a Stephen King cinematic universe. And then after all that happens, we're going to see a movie where they all have to come together to fight a giant Shawshank Redemption warden monster. Obviously, that was a joke. They're not actually going to do that, the warden monster thing. But don't be surprised with the way it was successful that they're going to remake a whole fuck ton of Stephen King movies and then try to connect them, because the whole cinematic universe thing is like the model now. I mean, for those who don't know, it had a $35 million budget, production budget. So you basically double that to include marketing, which would bring it up to around $70 million. And then you typically only keep about 55% of the gross in the United States. The 45% or so goes to the chains. So you got to factor in, you got to think maybe, okay, overall production cost, it would have to gross like 100 million, 120 million to really break even. Movies are expensive. Don't be fooled when you go to Box Office Mojo and it says like movie only cost 35 million. It didn't. That's just the part about filming it and like producing the physical movie itself. Doesn't include marketing, doesn't include all the other factors of how much money you lose. Movie theaters don't just play movies for free. Like, you got to pay them too. And that's not included in those budgets. So the movie, that said, despite the budget being bigger than it appears, has grossed a fuck ton of money worldwide. A fuck ton. It could go on to be one of the highest grossing films of all time. And so that its sequel is immediately in production. Like, there's no way they won't be rushing the shit out of that now. But don't be surprised if they're like, okay, we just might have accidentally discovered a whole new cinematic universe here. So at the time I record this, and this information will be out of date, and I apologize for that, on an official budget of $35 million, which is more like 120 to break even, it has grossed $553 million worldwide. Now, different countries take different percentages. For example, if you get a movie into China, you keep about 25% of the gross. The theater chains keep about 75% of the gross. Yet, there's so many people in China who watch movies that 25% is still a massive amount of money for a studio to take in. That's a whole separate issue. But point is, it has been very successful, and don't be surprised if we get some sort of Stephen King cinematic universe coming up. I'm calling it now. I think that's going to happen. So my last subject here for the night, which I'm not going to have much to say on, I just wanted to acknowledge it because I found it very awesome. Tonight, this is how far in advance this podcast gets recorded, depending on when you're listening to it. Tonight, Curb Your Enthusiasm Season 9 premieres. And I had heard a while ago that Curb Your Enthusiasm was going to make a return. I didn't know when, and I didn't know if that was even really happening. And then all of a sudden I noticed, holy shit, that's actually happening, and it's tonight. That's insane. So I'm very happy that Curb Your Enthusiasm is back. If you've never seen it, that's a fantastic show. It's basically Seinfeld, but made by the guy who made Seinfeld, Larry David. It's basically the sequel show to Seinfeld. And the fact that it wasn't even so much that I wanted to talk about Curb Your Enthusiasm, because that show's great, and I think already a lot of people know that. I want to talk about the fact that he could just do that. Like, the show never got canceled. He just decided he didn't want to make another season until he decided he wanted to make another season. And that's carte blanche, man. Like, that is some skills. And I love that we exist now in a time frame where TV models have really changed. Like, there was a time there where a TV show would have its run, and if it got canceled, that was the end of the game. If it stopped for any reason, that was the end of the game. Now, TV shows are much more flippant about that type of thing. And I think the show that kind of started that accidentally was Family Guy. I mean, I'm sure people could cite some earlier examples, but that's the earliest one that comes to mind for me. Family Guy kept getting canceled and then resurrected. And then the same thing started happening with Futurama. There was a big push to make Futurama come back kind of the way that had happened with Family Guy over and over again. The difference was that Family Guy was able to stay on the air, whereas Futurama got canceled multiple times. And I think according to the writing staff, they've completed 4 different series finales, which means, and I don't mean series in the British sense, I mean series in the American sense, where series doesn't mean the season of the show, it means the entirety of the show. So they've canceled that show 4 times. And they're still looking to bring it back again. And I find it interesting that we just live in a time where that can happen. Like Rick and Morty, Robot Chicken, both examples of shows that they basically just say, all right, you make your season, take as long as you need to produce it, and when you're done, that's when we'll air it. And Curb Your Enthusiasm is another one of these where it's like, I'm going to take like a decade off and then make another one. That's just crazy. And I'm happy that they get to do that. That's a great type of creative freedom. And I really respect that they can do that and still produce good content. Now, obviously, I haven't seen this episode or this season yet, but I'm hoping for it, and I'm sure it'll be great. I'm not too worried about that. But I just wanted to talk about that because I found that interesting. And I wonder if you guys think the same thing. Do you think it's interesting that TV models have changed that way, that you have that kind of freedom? Now, obviously, there's certain shows that don't. You know, they try to adhere to a more normal model, but then sometimes if you're successful enough, you're allowed to do that. And that's, I think, fascinating. So, yeah, that's it. All right, I want to thank you guys very much for listening. I want to thank, of course, to Kyle, Corey, Justin, Rob, Trey, and Tim for their support. Thank you to everybody else's support, including those of you who just choose to tune in and listen. I really appreciate all of that. If you want to get access to these early or access to my other videos early, please consider joining the Patreon. The link is in the description. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Have a good one.